The school year is coming to a close quickly, although probably not quickly enough for the students, but it is approaching. If you are a parent, you certainly are well aware of the challenges you and your children have been dealing with over the past school year. One of the major ones has been overcrowded classrooms. Our senior education reporter, Deanna Sumanak-Johnson, has been looking into this. A great report we aired for you earlier this morning, but I'm happy that you're here live to talk about it a little bit more. Some of the innovative solutions to this chronic overcrowding problem. So welcome, number one.
Thank you so much for having me.
Why is it such an ongoing issue, overcrowding, Deanna?
Heather, I'm so glad to get a chance to talk to you about this because it is so complex. It's hard to compress into those 2 minutes in a news story. So that's really just nuts and bolts. But it is such a complicated issue. There are many factors behind this. The main one is where people are choosing to live. So one part of this is immigration, new Canadians coming into the country. And by the way, every school board we spoke to said they're so happy to welcome these people. The problem is that there's not enough spots in schools. Part of it is also, Heather, internal migration. So it's people who, frankly, like me, who are raising their children downtown in big urban centers that perhaps was not happening 10 years ago or 20 years ago as much. It's where people are choosing to live. It's also where people are having to live due to affordability, that fewer and fewer families with young children can afford single-family homes. So a school that prior, maybe 10 or 20 years prior, used to accommodate a certain catchment, as they call it, a certain survey. Now that survey, instead of 150 or 200 kids, may have 1,000 children because there may be a high-rise there. There may be a townhouse complex. Lots of multi-family dwellings, which means a lot more kids in a certain spot. So it's so many factors, all of them tied to migration, both immigration and internal movement within Canada.
So interesting that some of the very issues that are causing the housing crisis are being seen in this other way
100%.
in terms of the education system.
And honestly, when we looked at some of the places, some were obvious: Toronto, Vancouver, Surrey, Edmonton, Calgary, and some, Peterborough, Ontario, the Kawarthas, beautiful cottagey country. And I was thinking, well, during the pandemic, a lot of people who had the ability for flexible work from home.
Get out of the city.
Get out of the city, get more space, raise your children in this beautiful natural place. But of course, that means a boom of kids in schools.
And
so
pressure.
It's lots of those little, as you said, economic factors and internal migrations that are nudging these numbers as well.
So a number of school boards are trying to deal with this, obviously, and coming up with some innovative solutions. I mean, I know they're looking at longer school days, which may not be popular in some circles, but what are some of the things that they're tossing around right now or trying out?
The longer school day is something we heard from the Surrey District School Board, and that's just for 7 high schools that are experiencing really a critical overcrowding. They would not impose that on younger children. Basically, a longer school day means you can fit about 15% more kids into the school because they have more periods, so they're spread out through the day. We got a chance to do a little time lapse at one of those really big schools in Surrey, BC. Some of the other things, and I must tell you, they're even less popular than the longer school day, is going back to hybrid. Parents may remember it with some sense of trauma from the pandemic. That means that part of your lessons is online, part of your lessons is in person, in order to, again, reduce the number of kids present at school at any given time. No one has actually initiated that yet, but they're talking about it, and I can tell you that parents are not happy at all. It really had an impact on mental health of a lot of children and teens. It was not a popular measure during the pandemic. And then another one, we may remember it from our youths, portables, right? I mean, I remember sludging to one. My colleagues in the education unit and I were talking about, you walk in and you have snow on your boots and then all of that melts in that little plywood structure. Well, those are still around. In fact, some of the new schools are being built with portables already there, so they're anticipating that overcrowding already. We got a chance to speak to the superintendent of the Surrey District School Board, and he talked about how this extended school day specifically would work and some of the challenges around it.
It does create other challenges for us, obviously, where you've got kids that may have a break in their course scheduling, and then they don't necessarily have a place to go because the school is obviously quite full. And it's also hard for, certainly for our kids in some of our schools where they may be dropping off or picking up their younger siblings at elementary school. So we recognize that there's some community challenges as well.
So he did say that that will allow them to expand that capacity of school by about 15%, but he acknowledges, Heather, this is not a perfect solution, but he did caution it's something they're looking at permanently. So this won't be temporary because they're anticipating growth in the years to come as well.
So if the numbers are there and will be there in the years to come, what's to stop school boards from just building more schools?
I mean, that is the logical question, isn't it? And obviously, funding, schools are very expensive. But it's much more complicated than funding because to build a school, I think all of us who live in rapidly expanding areas are going, wait a second, I've seen at least 10 condo buildings pop up like mushrooms down my street. Could they not have just put that money into building one school? Finding a spot for a school is very complicated. It has to meet a number of requirements. Obviously, it has to be a huge space, which is very difficult to find in places like Toronto or Vancouver. It has to also have a green space. It has to be accessible. So it takes a long time to build a school. And then there's something intrinsic to the process by which school boards get funding to build more schools that kind of protracts and complicates this whole procedure. I got a chance to speak to an urban planner that works with school districts to help them work with municipalities and plan for more schools. Here's what he had to say about that process.
Because you already have to be in an overcrowding situation to be funded, that's problem number one. Problem number two is by the time you get funded, a new school doesn't take days or a year to build. It takes several years to build. So even by the time you've gotten funded, you're already in a problem. It may take 3, 4, 5, 6 years to build that school. So by the time that new school gets built and occupied, it's already full. It's very much catch up.
And Heather, people like Jack Amendolia are saying that process needs to change. We need to be proactive, not reactive. So when a school board tells you we're anticipating way more kids in the years to come, listen to them, work with them, get started on those schools now so that you are prepared for those children when they arrive.
That need then.